I was halfway up the front steps when the grocery bag split. Oranges rolled like little suns across the porch. Bumping into the railing I sanded with my own hands 20 summers ago. My knee flared, and for a second I just stood there, breath fogging in the cool air, thinking stupid things like, at least the eggs survived. You get to a certain age, and the small disasters start to sound like drum rolls for the big ones. The door was unlocked, of course it was. I pushed it open with an elbow, caught another orange under my shoe, and looked straight into the slack grin of my son-in-law sprawled on the couch. Jasper. Even his name sounded like a false gemstone. Beer, he said, not looking away from the game. Grab me one, would you, Felix? No, please. No, hi. Just that lazy, entitled beer. On my coffee table, my coasters under his bottles, my rug crumpled under his muddy sneakers. The television shook the frames on the wall, photos of a family held together by my overtime and quiet apologies. Jasper never noticed the frames. He noticed my refrigerator. I set the surviving groceries on the kitchen counter, the handles digging lines into my palms. I could feel the panic starting, a familiar crawling heat that used to arrive when the mortgage notice came early or the mechanic frowned at the engine. I pressed it down. Jasper, I said, keeping my voice level, you can gut it yourself. He finally turned his head. Grease-shined hair, smirk that had made me uneasy from the first handshake. I'm busy. And you're home. Come on, old man. One beer. Before I could answer, she was there, my daughter, Tayan, hips against the doorway, arms folded, phone face down on her palm like a small sleeping animal. Her eyes were tired, but not from work. I know the look people get when work wears them down, because I wore it for 40 years. This was a different kind of tired. The kind you get from ignoring the obvious. Dad, she said, with the soft warning she used when she was 12 and asking for money I didn't have. Just get Jasper the beer. Tayan, I said, I am not your husband's waiter. Her face hardened into that flat, adult mask I still couldn't read. This is our house, she said. We split the bills. Everyone pulls their weight. Please don't make this into a thing. I looked around at our house, the mantel I built, the crown molding I taught myself to do by watching a neighbor, the dent in the hallway where Tayan crashed her first bike. I'd been making it into a thing my entire life, turning empty rooms into shelter, thin paychecks into tuition, scraped knees into lessons about balance. Jasper exhaled impatiently. Ultimatum time, he muttered, half amused, eyes on the screen. Either he learns the new rules, or he can take a little walk. Tayan's mouth drew a straight line. Dad, she said carefully, obey Jasper, or she glanced at him as if to check the words or leave. For now, until you can respect how we run things. The radio in my head went silent. I set the bread down very gently, like it might explode. I thought of the way Tayan used to run into my arms at the school gates, sneakers flashing, hair smelling of chlorine and crayons. I thought of the first time she brought Jasper home, the way he shook my hand while assessing the square footage. Okay, I said. No argument. No speech. I had given too many words to people who translated them into invoices. I walked to my room and pulled the old suitcase from under the bed. The zipper was stiff. Everything that leaves does so with a little resistance. I folded shirts I could have folded blind, slid in 3 pairs of socks, my shaving kit, the small folder with papers I keep for emergencies, birth certificate, car title, the last 5 mortgage payment receipts with my pen marks at the bottom. Every month, rain or shine, I sent half. Just until you're steady, I told them. The steadiness never arrived. In the hallway, I paused at the photo that always stops me, the one of Tayan at 6, front teeth missing, holding the cardboard diorama we'd built for the science fair. We'd made the solar system out of painted foam balls and toothpicks. I'd sat up late stringing fishing line from Jupiter, whispering the names like a prayer: Mercury, Venus, Earth. I touched the glass once, then kept moving. Back in the living room, Jasper barely looked up. Don't forget the door, he said. You always leave it unlocked. Tayan's eyes were shiny, but pride is a stubborn glue. She didn't move. I didn't slam the door. I didn't give them that satisfaction. I walked out into the evening with my suitcase bumping the steps and the bag of groceries I'd paid for sitting on their counter. The oranges would be fine without me. The car started on the second try. The radio offered an oldies station. I shut it off. Silence and the road. That's been my therapist for years. 20 minutes later, the shock bubbled into anger and then into something like clarity. The streetlights made bright islands on the asphalt, and between them was darkness deep enough to hold a life. I drove past the shopping center where we'd bought Tayan's first school shoes, white with tiny wings on the sides that made her run faster, she swore. I saw the bank where I'd signed for a small loan to cover her braces. I passed the community college where I paid her first semester in cash and smiled at the bursar like a man not terrified of being short. She transferred to a university 2 states away. I sent money there, too. I sent it by check, by wire, by breath held and hopes pinned to a ledger that never balanced. And then the wedding. God, the wedding. Jasper wanted a venue with uplights. Tayan wanted a band with a horn section. I wanted my daughter to be happy. The bill left a crater in my savings and a quiet in my chest. I told myself joy was worth its price. Later, when the roof needed patching and the car needed brakes, I told myself memory could insulate against the cold. It can't. Only heat does that. Heat and checks mailed on the first of the month. When they bought the house, my house, if we're measuring by who fed the furnace, I put down 1/3 of the down payment and offered to split the mortgage until they found their feet. I wrote memo, family on every transfer, like labeling the arrow in a magic trick. Money went in and disappeared. Applause never followed. A billboard flashed past, sunrise in clean rooms weekly rates. The kind of place you choose when you're bleeding slowly and need to stop the flow. I pulled in. The office smelled like industrial lemon and a story I didn't want to hear. The clerk, boy, really handed me a key with a plastic fob the color of hospital walls. Room 12 held a bed, a chair, and a painting of a sailboat sailing nowhere. I set my suitcase on the chair, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the weight of the day settle. The ceiling fan ticked like a patient clock. I took out the folder and spread the papers on the thin blanket. Tuition receipts, wedding invoices, bank transfers to J and T household, mortgage stubs, each one with my handwriting. It looked like a scrapbook of invisible work. My life, pressed flat and hole punched. Somewhere between the braces and the band deposit, I'd stopped keeping track of the total. Tonight, I did the math in my head until the numbers blurred, then reached for the motel notepad and wrote them down. The sum stared back, gentle and obscene. You can't buy love, but you can certainly subsidize its performance. I'm not a man given to big gestures. I built my life from small, repeated actions. Wake, work, pay, fix, forgive. But Tayan's ultimatum lodged under my ribs like a hard kernel. Perhaps it was finally a seed. I stood, washed my face, and watched an unfamiliar man in the mirror dab water from his gray beard. Felix, I said aloud, like introducing myself. The sound steadied me. Tomorrow, my birthday, as it happened, though no one in that house had mentioned it, I would begin to act for myself. I clicked off the light. The dark carried its own kind of mercy. In it, I could picture an ocean I'd never stood beside, a house with salt on the windows, and a knock at a door I didn't recognize yet. I didn't know it then, but the knock was already on its way. Morning came in with the pale conviction of a hospital curtain. I lay there a minute and listened to the fan whisper over the motel room, then reached for the folder on the chair the way a diver reaches for air. Action, I'd promised myself. Not speeches, not arguments. Action. I made coffee in the tiny machine, the kind that produces equal parts caffeine and plastic. It did the job. I opened the folder and spread the papers across the bed like a battlefield map. Red pen, notepad, phone. My birthday, happy birthday, Felix, would be a day for subtraction. First, the mortgage. J and T, household, ACH draft, first of month. My half. A habit so old my hand wrote the amount without my brain. I dialed the lender's number and braced for the maze. It came, cheerful recorded voice, options nested like Russian dolls. I took the path I knew billing, then automatic payments, then agent. A minute of Tenny Vivaldi, and I landed a human being named Carla. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" "I need to cancel an automatic payment," I said. "It's a voluntary contribution on a loan I am not the primary on." She confirmed my identity with the usual questions: last four, home address, secret answer to a question I'd written 15 years ago and forgotten until my mouth said it. Favorite teacher, Miss D'Angelo. Second grade. Patient with left-handers. Then I gave the payment ID and held while her keyboard ticked like rain. "All right, Mr. Felix," she said finally. "I've removed the recurring ACH from your checking account. No future payments will be drafted." Like a plug pulled from a drain, relief gurgled through me. "Please send a confirmation email." Done. "Anything else?" "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. "Please note on the account that the borrower should contact you directly for any adjustments or hardships. I will not be intervening." Silence, professional and brief. "I can add a note," she said. "Add to," I said, and we both laughed a little, which felt like stretching a sore muscle and finding it still works. I hung up, drew a square around mortgage, canceled on my notepad, and exhaled. One muscle unclenched. 9 more to go. Insurance next. I'd set up a bundled policy for their house and 2 cars, lower premiums, because of my spotless record and the longevity discount carriers hand out like gold stars to men who never file claims. I had agreed to pay the house policy outright and spot them half on the autos, just for the first year. We were 3 years past firsts. The insurer's robot wanted me to try their app. I wanted a human who could say my name without insisting I download anything. Eventually, Maya answered. "Policy ending in 43?" She confirmed. "That's the homeowner's policy for 218 Sycamore," I said. "Remove my payment method and terminate at the end of the paid term. Also remove all multi-policy discounts tied to my profile. They'll need their own pricing. You understand their premium may increase, yes?" I kept my voice gentle. "That's the point." While she typed, I opened another tab on the prepaid motel Wi-Fi and moved my own policies, the tired sedan, the little term life policy I'd kept in case someone needed planting fees, into a clean account with a new login. Clean borders. Clear lines. Effective date? Maya asked. "Today," I said. "Send notices directly to the named insureds." Click. Email. Checkmark. I felt taller by a quarter inch. Autos, then. "Remove authorized driver Jasper B. from any policy tied to my account," I said, spelling it carefully. On my screen, I saw his smile the first time he slid behind the wheel of a car insured on my good name, how he'd revved it with a boy's glee that somehow felt like a dare. That ride was over. Bank time. I'd made them each authorized users on one of my cards back when "just in case" sounded like love. Tayan's name had looked so small embossed on plastic. You don't realize you're giving someone a key until you hear a door close behind you. The bank's fraud department picked up faster than customer service ever does. I was calm, clear, factual. I'd like to remove all authorized users from my credit card ending in 9924 and block any physical or virtual cards associated with those users, effective immediately. "Do you want to issue new cards for yourself?" the agent asked. "Yes," I said. New number, new CVV, new start. I pictured the digits like fresh lumber stacked in a truck bed, cut to size, ready to build. In the checking account, I set up alerts like tripwires, any withdrawal over 50, any login from a new device, any attempt to reauthorize old payments. I turned a faucet labeled "Family" to off and listened for leaks. There were always leaks. I found a gym membership I'd been spotting for over a year, a photo storage plan for someone else's cloud, a streaming service with a show I'd never watch. Click, cancel, confirm. Each one released a tiny hiss of air, like an overinflated balloon coming back to shape. Lenders next. Back when they were scraping through a gap, I'd co-signed a small personal loan for the last of the wedding expenses. The balance was low now, but my name had remained in the shadows like a guarantor ghost. I called, asked for my obligation to be removed given the term reached 90% completion and the borrower's payment history was spotless, thanks in part to my surprise payments made on months that ran lean. The supervisor couldn't remove me, but he could flag the account to block any third-party payments not originating from the borrowers. It wasn't perfect, but it was a wall. Between calls, I took notes like I was back reconciling accounts at the machine shop: date, agent name, action, confirmation number. Order imposes mercy. The notepad filled with tiny rectangles and arrows. I realized my hands no longer shook. At noon, I ate lunch from the motel vending machine, a sandwich that had ambitions of being bread, and kept going. Utilities. I had to log into their power account, just for emergencies. Delete my payment method. Remove my email. Gas, same. Internet, same. Even the lawn service I'd hired when the dandelions began to look like yellow debt, I called old Frank and told him to switch his invoices to Jasper. He grunted. He won't like that. I know, I said, but he's a grown man with a mower. At 2 o'clock, I called the college where I still contributed to a small lingering tuition balance for one of Jasper's online certificates, something in business operations he'd started and paused and resumed and paused, like a car unsure of the clutch. Remove the recurring payment, I said. If there is a balance, please invoice the student directly. The clerk said she'd heard worse on a Tuesday. I believed her. By 3, the motel room looked like a command center, papers squared, phone hot, emails stacking like bricks in my inbox. Confirmation, auto-pay removed. Notice of policy change. Your card has been reissued. A new email came from the mortgage portal. Your automatic payment has been canceled at the request of the payer. For a second, I imagined the future ping across town, the way a quiet change on my screen would later ring their doorbell. I called one last place, the bank where I'd opened a small savings account in Tayan's name when she was born. I'd kept it alive with birthday deposits, graduation gifts, tiny Christmas snowfalls of money. Years ago, she'd emptied it to buy a dress she needed for a job interview. I'd never closed the account. Today, I moved the last $27.62 to my own savings and told the banker to terminate the shell. It felt ceremonial, like folding a flag. I didn't feel cruel. I felt awake. All day, no one called me. No angry buzz from Jasper, no brittle text from Tayan. It would take time for ripples to hit the shore. That was fine. I wanted the lag. I wanted them to meet the full weight of cause and effect with no hand sliding dollars under the door. When the light angled low and turned the motel painting of the sailboat into something almost hopeful, I put the cap on my pen and sat still long enough to feel my pulse. It tripped along, steady as a metronome. Control has a sound. I'd forgotten it. I thought about warning them. An email with bullet points, a careful list of changes, a bland subject line, updates. But I could hear Jasper's laugh as he scrolled, the way he'd draft a reply that bent my plain language into a gilt hook. I set the idea down and watched it walk away. Instead, I planned. Tomorrow, I'd go to the credit union and move my checking to a fresh account under a new member number. I'd set up direct deposit from the shop's retirement distributions and sever the shared Zelle link Tayan occasionally used to borrow 50 with a heart emoji. I'd buy a cheap phone line with a new number and port my contacts manually, leaving behind the family group chat where love and logistics got tangled into knots designed to look like hugs. I pictured them in their house, the one my hands had helped hold up. A first of the month would arrive with no draft. An insurance renewal would land on their doorstep without my umbrella spread over it. A purchase would be declined. There would be surprise, then irritation, then, if I allowed myself hope, something like reflection. Or not. Either way, the lesson wouldn't be mine to learn. I changed into a clean shirt and walked to the diner next to the motel. The waitress called me Han and topped off my coffee without asking. I ate meatloaf that tasted like someone tried and mashed potatoes that didn't pretend to be anything else. All the while, I felt the oddest sensation, like my pockets were lighter because they finally belonged to me. Back in the room, I stacked the folder, slipped the pen into the spine, and set everything on the chair as if tucking in a child. On the notepad, under the day's boxes and notes, I wrote a single sentence. They don't know yet. I underlined it once. Let them meet their lives. Let bills announce themselves and phones go dark and adult voices on the other end of lines ask for the adult in the room. I would not be the echo that answers. Before lights out, I scrolled my call log: Carla, Maya, Frank, the loan supervisor, the college clerk, 3 banks, 2 insurers. A chorus of polite strangers who had, without knowing, handed me back small, labeled pieces of myself. I whispered their names the way I once whispered planets. When I turned off the lamp, the dark no longer felt like a void. It felt like a room cleared of clutter, air moving where it hadn't in years. Somewhere, a fuse I used to hold had been returned to its panel. Somewhere, a man who kept everyone afloat had climbed into a lifeboat and found it could carry him, too. 3 days of silence. That's how long it took before the storm broke. The first call came mid-morning, a cautious, "Hey, Dad," from Tayan, with just enough sugar in her tone to mask the metal underneath. I didn't answer. The second call was Jasper's, short and sharp. "What the hell, man?" Then came the trickle that turned into a flood: voicemails, missed calls, texts with the same rotation of moods: bewilderment, irritation, outright rage, and finally the syrupy, performative concern. I watched the screen light up, each name and number a spark in a fire I refused to feed. I sipped my motel coffee, scratched another line in my notebook, and kept the phone face down. By the end of the day, they had left a dozen messages. By the second day, it was closer to 30. The tone shifted, less demanding, more pleading. "Dad, we just want to talk. You can't just walk away like this." Fine, maybe we all said things we didn't mean. The subtext was clear enough. The bills were stacking up, and the safety net they'd assumed was permanent had vanished overnight. On the 4th morning, the pounding on the motel door came at 8:17 a.m. I'd been expecting it. I opened the door to find Tayan and Jasper standing there, looking like they'd come from opposite corners of a fight they hadn't finished. She was flushed, her hair pinned too neatly to be casual. He had that twitchy energy of a man rehearsing his lines. "Dad, this is ridiculous," Tayan started. "We need to go home and figure this out." "Home?" I asked, leaning on the doorframe. "You mean the house you told me to leave?" "That's not," she began, but Jasper cut in. "You can't just cut us off like this," he said, voice tight. "We've got payments. I stepped aside, letting the stale hallway light catch the edge of my expression. "You remember that night? You told me to either listen to Jasper or leave. I took the option you gave me." That was in the heat of the moment. Tayan protested. "No," I said, shaking my head. It was perfectly clear. And I listened. They traded glances, hers tinged with desperation, his with something more calculating. I could almost hear the clock ticking on their accounts. "We can work something out," Jasper tried again, softer this time. "Just come back. Help us through this month." "After that, maybe, Jasper," I said, my voice flat as ledger paper. "I'm done. You wanted the authority. Now you have the responsibility that goes with it." Tayan's eyes welled up, but I could see the steel in them even as she blinked. This wasn't reconciliation, it was negotiation, and they were already losing. "I'm not coming back," I told them. "And I'm not paying another cent for your comfort." That chapter's closed. They stood there a moment longer, waiting for me to crack. I didn't. When I shut the door, it was with the quiet satisfaction of a man signing the last page of a long, ugly contract. Later that afternoon, I walked to Bean and Barrel, the little coffee shop I'd been going to for years, long before the motel. The place smelled of dark roast and cinnamon, and the old jazz station played softly under the chatter. "Felix." I turned to see Bob Holloway, white hair, crooked grin, and a handshake like sandpaper. We'd worked together back in my finance days. "Bob," I said, genuinely glad to see him. "How's retirement treating you?" We caught up over steaming mugs, swapping the usual updates about health, neighbors, and the price of everything. But when I told him, lightly, that I was between addresses, something in his expression changed. "You know," he said, leaning in, "your daughter's husband came into the credit union a few weeks back. Tried to get a home equity loan on your place." "My place," I repeated. "Yeah. Papers said you were a co-signer, but the title check flagged you as sole owner. Looked annoyed when we told him he'd need your signature." I felt a slow, deliberate heat build in my chest. Jasper hadn't just been spending freely, he'd been planning to leverage the house itself, maybe without telling me at all. "What did you do?" I asked. Refuse the application. Policy. Bob shrugged. But he'll try again somewhere else. Guys like him don't like hearing no. I sat back, my coffee cooling untouched. The picture was clearer now. My departure hadn't just cut their spending money. It had stopped a bigger play dead in its tracks. And for the first time since I walked out of that house, I realized I wasn't just defending my independence. I was defending the last piece of ground with my name on it. I smiled at Bob, but it wasn't the kind of smile I used to give. It was sharper, calculating. Ready. Thanks for the tip, I said. Sounds like I've got more work to do. The next morning, I couldn't shake Bob's words from my head. Forging my name on loan papers wasn't just arrogance, it was criminal. And if Jasper was willing to do that at the credit union, odds were he'd tried it elsewhere. I drove to the precinct, the same squat brick building I'd passed 100 times without ever going in. Inside, it smelled faintly of coffee and copier toner. The duty officer, a woman with the patience of someone who's heard everything twice already, waved me toward a desk sergeant. I explained the situation as plainly as I could. My son-in-law had attempted to secure a loan against my property, without my consent, possibly using forged documents. I handed over the folder I'd brought, photocopies of my deed, correspondence, and Bob's note. The sergeant, a lean man with glasses and an economy of expression, leafed through the pages. You said his name's Jasper B? That's right. He tapped at his keyboard, scanning records I couldn't see. His face didn't change, but his voice lost its neutral tone. Your son-in-law is on our radar. Multiple reports of unpaid debts. We've had inquiries from collection agencies, even a casino's legal department. A casino? My voice felt smaller than I intended. He nodded. According to our cross-check, he owes somewhere in the range of $18,000 to $20,000. Some of that's on credit lines, some on personal markers. There's mention of gambling online and in person. I sat there, the pieces falling into a pattern I wished I'd recognized sooner. The expensive tastes, the sudden emergencies for cash, the way he'd pressed for my signature on things that didn't quite make sense. He hadn't been floundering, he'd been angling. For how long? I asked quietly. Couple of years at least, the sergeant said. We think he's been juggling creditors to keep the wolves from the door. That's usually when people start looking for bigger assets to leverage. My house, I said. Exactly. I left with a copy of the incident report and a referral to the property crimes unit. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but my jaw ached from how tightly I was holding it. Back at the motel, I drafted an official eviction notice, not for some tenant in arrears, but for my own daughter and her husband. I still held the deed in my name. Legally, they were occupants at my sufferance, and my sufferance had expired. The letter was clinical, every word stripped of emotion. Effective immediately, you are to vacate the premises of 218 Sycamore within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in legal action for unlawful detainer. I printed 2 copies, one for certified mail, one to hand deliver if it came to that. As I slid the papers into an envelope, the truth settled with a cold precision. Jasper hadn't just disrespected me or taken advantage of my generosity. He'd been working, patiently, toward an endgame where the house became his by my signature if possible, by forgery if not. The beer on the couch, the ultimatums, the arrogance, they were just surface ripples over a deeper current. I thought back to that night on the porch, groceries splitting in my hands, and realized I hadn't just walked away from a bad arrangement. I'd stepped out of a trap. Now it was time to dismantle it entirely. It started small. A quiet word over coffee with an old coworker. A brief conversation in the church foyer after Sunday service. I didn't embellish, didn't add heat, just the facts. For years, I had been covering half the mortgage on Tayan and Jasper's house, paying their home insurance, contributing to their utilities, even covering wedding and school costs long after they'd promised to stand on their own. I'd cut it off after an ultimatum from my own daughter to either obey Jasper or leave. No judgment, no demands for sympathy, just the truth, dropped like pebbles into still water. The ripples moved faster than I expected. By the second week, the grocery clerk knew. By the third, I overheard whispers at the barbershop. Folks in a town like ours keep a mental ledger of who pulls their weight and who rides on others' backs. Jasper and Tayan's standing began to shift, subtle at first, a cooler greeting here, a skipped invitation there. I didn't gloat. This wasn't revenge, it was sunlight. And sunlight makes rot visible. Jasper caught wind of it and started his own counter-campaign. On social media, he claimed I was struggling mentally and lashing out in cruelty against my own family. He told people I'd always been controlling, that I couldn't stand to see my daughter happy without my money running the show. The usual projection, you could almost admire the speed of it if you forgot what it was for. Some folks might have believed him if they didn't know my history. But in this town, memories are long, and my reputation as a steady hand had been built over decades, not months. Then came the call. It was late evening, the motel room washed in the orange light of a single lamp. My phone buzzed and Tayan's name appeared. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to hear her voice. "Dad," she said, her tone soft and trembling. "I'm pregnant." The words landed with a dull weight. "All right," I said carefully. "There are complications," she continued. "The stress is making it worse. I need you to stop this. People are talking. We need help financially to get through this." I kept my voice even. "You're telling me you need help for medical reasons?" "Yes," she said quickly. "The baby, my health, it's all connected." "I'll tell you what," I said, choosing each word like it might be evidence later. "If there's a legitimate medical need, I will help. But I'll do it directly through your doctor's office, paying them, not you. I'll need the physician's statement and billing." Silence. Then her voice hardened. "You don't believe me." "I believe you're asking for money," I said. "And I believe in making sure it goes where you say it will." The silence stretched, brittle as ice. Then she snapped, "You've changed. You're not the father I remember." I almost said, "No, I'm the father you never noticed," but I let her hang up without a reply. The phone went dark, and I sat there in the stillness, feeling the old ache of love tangled with the new armor of suspicion. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Because once you've seen the depth of someone's manipulation, you can't unsee it, and you can't, in good conscience, keep feeding it. It happened on a Saturday morning at the farmer's market. I was at a stall picking through tomatoes when I heard my name, loud and sharp. "There he is." Jasper's voice cut through the hum of chatter. The man who abandoned his pregnant daughter. Heads turned. He was standing on the other side of the aisle, arms spread in mock outrage, that smirk pasted on like it had been printed there. "Ask him why." Jasper continued. "Ask him how a father can kick his own family out because he's too proud to admit he's losing his mind." I straightened, meeting his gaze without moving toward him. "You sure you want to have this conversation here, Jasper?" "Why not?" he said, drawing the eyes of a dozen shoppers. "You've been telling people lies about me. Let's clear the air." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "All right. You have somewhere between $18,000 and $20,000 in personal and gambling debts. You've attempted to take out a fraudulent loan against my property. You've been investigated by multiple creditors. That's the truth. If anyone doubts it, they can check public records." The murmur that followed wasn't sympathy. It was the sound of people rearranging their opinion of a man they'd just heard was drowning in debt. Jasper's mouth twitched, but he tried to grin it off. "See? This is what I mean. Delusional." I picked up my tomatoes, paid the vendor, and walked away without another word. The best rebuttal to a performance like his is to deny at the stage. That evening, I was back at the motel, reading on the bed, when a shadow passed across the thin curtains. A sharp knock followed. I didn't open the door. Instead, I picked up the phone and called the front desk. "Check the camera by room 12, I said. "I think my son-in-law's here." By the time the clerk confirmed it, Jasper pacing outside, glancing at the door, the police were already on their way. I stayed inside until the patrol car's lights flashed against the curtains. An officer came up to take my statement. I showed him the video file the clerk had copied from the surveillance system, clear as daylight, Jasper loitering where he had no business being. "That's enough to file for a protection order," the officer said. "Given your ongoing issues, I'd recommend it." 3 days later, I had a court-issued security order in hand. Jasper was legally barred from coming within 200 feet of me or the motel. The paper felt lighter than it should have, but the relief it brought was solid. What chilled me more came a week later, in a conversation with a retired paralegal I knew from church. Over coffee, she told me something she'd overheard from Jasper at a local bar. He's been reading up on property law, she said. Bragged about how, in 2 years, the statute of limitations might make it harder for you to contest certain claims if he could prove equitable interest in the house. It hit me like a brick. He'd been counting time, playing a long game where my house would, through some twisted argument, become his by default. All the pressure, the manipulation, the ultimatums, they weren't random outbursts. They were steps in a plan. Now, with the debts exposed, the eviction notice served, and a restraining order in place, there was no mistaking his intent. Jasper hadn't just been reckless or greedy. He had been working toward one goal: fraudulent possession of my home. And he had just run out of road to get there. I started with the largest number on the police report, a credit card company out of Chicago. I gave them my name, the address in question, and a statement I'd rehearsed in my head on the drive back from the station. The debtor, Jasper B., does not own and has no legal claim to 218 Sycamore. He does not live here with my consent, and no lien against him may be tied to my property. I will provide proof of ownership if required. The woman on the other end went quiet for a moment, the sound of her typing faint in the background. Then, understood, sir. We'll note it on the account. Can you send documentation? Already prepared, I said. By the end of the call, I had her direct email and a confirmation number. One more door closed to him. That first call set the pace. I went down the list from the police file, banks, payday lenders, even a high-interest finance company that made its living off desperation. The tone varied from professional detachment to outright eagerness, but every conversation ended the same. Jasper could not use my house or my address to stall his problems. When I reached the casino's collections department, the man on the line chuckled. "You're not the first father-in-law to call about this guy," he said. "But you're the first to do it before he tries another stunt." "I'm not interested in being part of his collateral," I told him. He laughed again. "Good attitude. We'll flag him." By the time I'd worked through the list, I felt a steady satisfaction building. The calls weren't about vengeance. They were about pulling the net out from under a man who'd been using me as his safety rope for far too long. 2 days later, I heard the first rumble of what those calls had set in motion. An old acquaintance from the factory called mid-morning. "Felix, you hear about Jasper?" "No," I said. "What now?" "He's out of a job." His boss didn't like what they were hearing: debts, police report, the loan thing. Said they don't want the liability or the press if something blows up. They let him go this morning. I pictured him leaving the site, helmet under one arm, jaw clenched tight. Jasper had relied on charm the way some men rely on a good set of tools, but charm doesn't pay the bills when the numbers turn red. The pressure didn't stop there. By the weekend, the collectors began to close in. They didn't call me, couldn't, thanks to the notifications I'd made, but they started showing up at 218 Sycamore. A neighbor I trust sent me pictures. 2 men in windbreakers at the porch on Friday, a woman with a clipboard on Saturday. The expressions were all the same, polite but sharp-edged. The kind of faces that didn't leave until they had what they came for. Jasper had been able to bluff his way through bar tabs and overdue bills. But these were professionals. Bluffing them was like bluffing a rattlesnake. The call from Tayan came on Sunday evening. Her voice was higher than usual, pitched with the same tightness I'd heard when she was a child afraid of storms. "Dad, men came to the house today. They said Jasper owes money. A lot of money. Is this true?" "Yes," I said simply. "It's true." She hesitated. "How much?" 18 to 20,000, I said, not counting whatever's been added in the last few weeks. And that's before the gambling markers. Or the fact that he tried to take out a loan using my property as collateral without my consent. Silence stretched between us. I could almost hear the gears turning, the picture rearranging itself in her head. "You knew?" she asked finally. "I learned it recently," I said. "And I acted to make sure none of it could touch me or the house. But you needed to know too." She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, the edge in her voice was gone. He told me it was just a few bills. That we were fine. That you'd overreacted. That's what a man says when he's trying to keep the walls from closing in, I said. He doesn't tell you how high the water is until you're standing in it. She took a shaky breath. I don't even know how much of what he's told me is real. I can tell you what is real, I said. The debts are. The police report is. The eviction notice is. And the fact that I will not let my house or my name be used to clean up his mess. Those are the things you can count on. There was another pause, and when she spoke, her voice was smaller. I wish you'd told me sooner. You wouldn't have heard it, I said gently. Not then. You were still standing on his side of the line. This time, she didn't argue. And that, more than anything, told me she'd begun to see the ground under her feet for what it was: thin, unstable, and built on borrowed time. Now, the bills and the collectors and the empty space where his job used to be would do the rest. And Jasper would learn what it felt like when the safety net was gone and the fall was his alone. I met Tayan on neutral ground, the back room of the church, quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator where they kept communion wine and youth group soda. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, giving everything that flat, unforgiving tone you can't hide in. She came in cautiously, arms crossed, eyes darting around as if to make sure I hadn't brought an audience. She looked tired, and not just from lack of sleep. There was a heaviness about her, the kind that comes from carrying something you can't put down. I'm here, Dad, she said. What do you want to say? I'm going to make this simple, I told her, folding my hands on the table. You have one last chance to keep a relationship with me. But it's going to cost you not money, but truth. Her brows knit. What truth? The truth about what's happened, I said. About my years of financial support. About why I left. About what Jasper has done. Not whispered in corners, not in private apologies, publicly. She gave a small, incredulous laugh. Publicly? You mean, tell everyone? Yes, I said. 3 ways. First, you stand up in church next Sunday and speak. You tell them exactly what happened and what I've done for you. Second, you write a letter to the Chronicle, signed with your full name, explaining the same. Third, you post it on your Facebook account, word for word, so no one can twist it later. Her arms tightened across her chest. That will ruin my reputation. I shook my head. Tayan, you don't have the reputation you think you do. People already know pieces. I'm giving you the chance to own the truth before someone else defines it for you. Her eyes hardened. And if I don't? Then you lose me, I said plainly. Permanently. No calls, no visits, no second chances. You want your father in your life? This is the price. She sat back in the metal chair, biting her lip. If I do this, things go back to how they were? No, I said, my voice flat. Things will never go back. And the house will never be yours again. I've already signed it over to a veterans housing organization. It's out of my name, out of yours, out of Jasper's reach forever. Her head snapped up. You gave it away? I gave it to people who earned it, I said. Who won't try to trick or bully me into handing over what isn't theirs. That door is closed, Tayan. Permanently. She stared at me, her jaw trembling just slightly. So, even if I do all this, there's no help? Reconciliation, I said slowly, is possible only if there are no financial motives. I'm not interested in being a bank. I'm interested in being your father, if you want that without a price tag. She swallowed hard. You think I only care about money? I think you've been living in a situation where money came first, whether you admitted it or not, I said. And I think if we're going to have anything real between us, it has to be free of that. For a long moment, she didn't speak. I could see her working it over in her head, how the admission I was asking for would hit her friends, her neighbors, the people she'd spent years presenting a certain image to. She'd have to tear that image down herself. You're asking me to humiliate myself, she said finally. I'm asking you to tell the truth, I corrected. There's a difference. She looked away, staring at the worn linoleum floor. Her voice was small when she said, What if Jasper refuses? This isn't about Jasper, I said. This is about you and me. Whether you're willing to step into the light on your own. He's made his choices. This is yours. When she left, she didn't give me an answer. She just walked out with her arms wrapped around herself, like she was trying to hold in everything I'd just shaken loose. But I knew she understood something for the first time. This was not a negotiation. It was a line in the sand, and I wasn't moving it, not for her, not for anyone. And if she wanted her father, she'd have to cross it without a cent in her hand. Sunday morning, the church was already warm with the smell of brewed coffee and old hymnals when I arrived. Word had gotten around, attendance was higher than usual, and there was a restless hum in the air. I took a seat near the back, where I could see without being seen too much. When the announcements ended, Pastor Allen cleared his throat. Before we begin today's sermon, Sister Tayan has something she'd like to share. The air seemed to tighten. I saw a few people lean forward in their pews, curious. Others glanced at me, as if confirming whether I knew what was coming. I watched my daughter walk up the center aisle. She wasn't dressed to impress this time. Simple skirt, plain blouse, hair tied back. No mask. She carried a folded sheet of paper, but her hands were steady, which told me she'd rehearsed this moment until the fear had burned off. She faced the congregation, took a deep breath, and began. "I've spent the last few months pretending my life was fine," she said, her voice clear enough to reach the back rows. It wasn't. For years, my father has paid for my education, my wedding, my home, and even daily expenses. Not out of obligation, but out of love. And when my husband and I gave him an ultimatum, either obey Jasper or leave, he chose to leave the house he'd been paying for his whole life. A ripple passed through the room. I saw some heads turn toward me, others frozen in disbelief, some simply watching her, trying to take in the weight of her words. I told myself I was right, she continued, that I was protecting my marriage. But I wasn't. I was protecting my pride. I let someone else's influence turn me against my father, and I refused to see it until it was almost too late. I see now how much he sacrificed, and how wrong I was to let things get to that point. Her voice softened, but the room was silent enough to catch every word. I've said hurtful things to him. I've taken his support for granted. And I've let people believe things about him that weren't true. I'm sorry for all of it. Dad, I'm asking for your forgiveness, publicly, because I gave that ultimatum publicly. And I want everyone here to know it was wrong. She stopped reading and looked up from the paper, her eyes meeting mine for a moment before scanning the room again. I don't expect this to fix everything overnight. But I needed to say it out loud, where it can't be taken back. When she stepped down from the pulpit, Pastor Allen gave her a nod of quiet approval. The hall was still for a moment, then filled with low murmurs, people turning in their seats, nodding at me, some even patting my shoulder as they passed. The kind of gestures that carry weight in a place where reputation can last a lifetime. After the service, I stood near the back door, letting the line of well-wishers and curious onlookers pass. Tayan approached slowly, almost like she wasn't sure if she'd be welcome. "He's gone," she said when she reached me. "Gone where?" I asked. "Out of town. I don't know where exactly, just that he packed a bag and left. Anne, I filed for divorce yesterday." She let out a short, almost disbelieving laugh, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Turns out he's been using my credit cards to gamble. Thousands of dollars. I only found out when I started getting calls from the bank this week." I wasn't surprised, but I let her talk it through. Sometimes hearing yourself say the truth out loud is the only way it sticks. "They showed me the statements," she said, shaking her head. "Hotel charges I've never heard of. Online betting sites. Cash advances. And all this time, he told me we were fine. That you were the problem." I let the words settle before answering. That's what happens when the truth starts catching up. You find more of it than you expected. She blinked quickly, as if fighting back tears. "I don't know what I'm going to do next. I've never. I mean, without him, you'll figure it out," I said. "And this time, you'll do it without anyone holding the purse strings for you. That's the only way it's real. No shortcuts, no safety nets that can be taken away." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, just nodding slowly. For the first time in years, she didn't argue, didn't try to bargain, didn't try to turn the conversation toward what I could do for her. We stood there a moment longer in the cool air outside the church, and for the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, she was ready to start building something honest. Not because she had to, but because she finally wanted to. And that, I knew, was the only foundation worth trusting. 3 months can change more than you expect. The old house on Sycamore was no longer mine in any legal sense, but sometimes, when I drove through that part of town, I'd slow down and take a look. It was strange. There was no bitterness left in me when I saw it now. The porch rail had been repaired and painted a clean white, the grass neatly cut. On some days, a child's laughter would carry across the street, and I'd catch sight of bicycles lying in the yard or laundry fluttering on a line. 3 veteran families lived there now, each one making their own story in walls I once paid for. I liked knowing that the house was doing what it was meant to do, shelter people who valued it, not serve as a pawn in some selfish scheme. Every time I saw that flag hanging from the eaves, I thought of the men and women inside, people who'd already paid their debts in ways most of us can't imagine. The house had gone to the right hands. I'd traded it for something smaller, a one-story place on the edge of Lake Pemberton. It wasn't grand, but it didn't need to be. In the mornings, the mist drifted low over the water, the air cool and smelling faintly of pine. Loons called to each other from opposite ends of the lake, and the sound had a way of settling deep in my bones. There was no mortgage, no stack of bills with someone else's name tangled into mine. My expenses were simple utilities, groceries, the occasional repair, and all of it covered by my own income and savings. I didn't know anyone, and no one owed me. That freedom was worth more than any square footage I'd given up. Tayan had kept her word. She'd stood up in church, spoken with honesty, and faced people she'd once feared would judge her. She wrote the letter to the Chronicle, signed her full name, and even posted her statement on Facebook. She didn't take it down, not even when the comments came in, some supportive, some critical, some from people who clearly only knew half the story. Her honesty had done something I didn't entirely expect. It changed the conversation in town. Folks who drifted away during the worst of it began stopping to talk again. At the grocery store, the barber shop, the cafe, there was a shift. People nodded, said they'd read the letter, told me it took guts for her to own the truth like that. My name, once dragged through the mud by Jasper's lies, had been rinsed clean in the open air. Tayan herself was changing too. Therapy was helping her peel away layers she didn't even know she had, habits, fears, reflexes she'd picked up from years of leaning too hard on other people. She had a steady job now, paid her own rent, and was slowly chipping away at the debts Jasper had left behind. Our conversations were different. We didn't talk about what she needed from me financially. We talked about her latest project at work, a book she was reading, a new trail she'd found to walk in the evenings. When she visited, she didn't come with the weight of expectation. She came because she wanted to, not because she had something to ask for. Sometimes she'd bring lunch and we'd sit on the deck overlooking the water. The silences between us were no longer the heavy, unspoken kind filled with blame or resentment. They were easy, companionable. She never brought up getting the house back. She knew it was gone for good, and she understood why. One evening, as the sun slid low and turned the lake to molten gold, she sat next to me on the deck steps. We watched the ripples spread from a fish breaking the surface. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think love meant always being rescued. That if someone really cared, they'd fix everything for you. Now I think maybe it means being able to stand next to someone without leaning on them." I smiled, a slow, steady smile that came from somewhere deep. "That's the kind of love that lasts." She nodded, still looking at the water. "I don't know if I would have learned that without all this happening." "Most people don't," I said. "It's one of those lessons you only get the hard way." For the first time in a long time, I believed we might get this right, not by pretending the past hadn't happened, and not by going back to the way things were, but by building something new. Something based on mutual respect, not dependence. As the loons called in the distance and the lake settled into its nighttime stillness, I realized something important. The story wasn't ending here. It was simply turning a page, starting a new chapter neither of us had read before, and this time, we'd be writing it together.